So, as we start to tidy up the AV stuff, I want to welcome you to this evening and welcome you to St. Jerome's University and the St. Jerome's Lectures in Catholic Experience. My name is Scott Klein. I do have a number of housekeeping matters that I'll talk about before we introduce tonight's speaker. The first one is actually from Bishop Remy Deroux, who was here, as you recall, on January 21st. The bishop sent me I'd say a frenetic email about 2 days ago. He was absolutely horrified that somebody had contacted him about a reference from the Second Vatican Council. And if you know anything about Remy, you know that he's diligent. Well, he went out and found the reference the next day, but unfortunately he lost your email. So, if you're in the crowd tonight and you've been in contact with Bishop Remy Deroux, he desperately wants to talk to you because he has some information for you. So, and even if you haven't contacted him, I'm sure he would enjoy an email. So, whatever. You know his personality. So I do have a number of other just housekeeping kind of things. In the foyer, we have a number of tables. We have the University Catholic community has a table selling fairly traded coffee, tea, and chocolate, so make your way to that table. We also have Wordsworth Books, who is selling books. Mary Jo has a number of books that are available for sale, and I'm sure she would sign them. I'll speak for her. A number of other authors are there who've been mentioned this season or who have actually talked at St. Jerome's this lecture season. So make your way to Wordsworth Books. Also, Andrea Taylor, the host for this evening, really, she has a sign-up sheet at the table. So if you're interested in getting email updates from us, if you're interested in being on our mailing list, please see Andrea. A number of you are asking me how you get pamphlets. Some of you have seen those pamphlets. Well, if you're on our mailing list, we will mail those to you in September. And oftentimes what we will do is talk to you in April. There will be a kind of a back and forth. So if you're interested in being in communication with us, see Andrea. Also, because I always forget, always at the last moment, I'm sort of rushing to get in a highlight of our next lecture. Let me do this up front tonight. Our next lecture is March 18th. Dr. John Esposito will be here to talk about Christian-Muslim dialogue. A lot of you know John's work. He's sort of world-renowned, and I'm sure that some of the interest that's going on right now in Africa, he will be able to speak to quite intelligently. A lot of you see him on CNN and other news organizations. John's at Georgetown, and we'll be looking forward to speaking with us on March 18th. So I think that's it for housekeeping matters. So we'll get into this evening's sort of formalities. And I want to highlight the fact that tonight's lecture is the 2010-2011 Waterloo Catholic District School Board Lecture. St. Jerome's has a very good partnership, working relationship with the district, and it is one that we really cherish, and we're able to do a number of ventures together, this being one of them. So thanks to the Waterloo Catholic District School Board. So to introduce the speaker tonight, I've asked Dr. Christina Vanine, who's the director of the Master of Catholic Thought program at St. Jerome's University, to tell you a little bit about tonight's speaker and to welcome you. So, Dr. Vanine.
Thanks, Scott. I'm glad for the privilege of introducing to you Dr. Mary Jo Leddy. Currently, Mary Jo is the director of Romero House Community for Refugees in Toronto. She's also an adjunct professor at Regis College, which is part of the University of Toronto, an active member of the Ontario Sanctuary Coalition and PEN Canada. She's a journalist and a writer. For many of us, we know her as a founding editor of Catholic New Times, that independent national Canadian newspaper which began back in 1975. Mary Jo completed a PhD in the philosophy of religion under the direction of Emil Fackenheim. She utilized Hannah Arendt's political philosophy to investigate the Holocaust, and through that learned about the basis of social engagement. She has received honorary doctorates from the University of Windsor, York University, Mount St. Vincent University, Emmanuel College at the University of Saskatchewan, and the University of Waterloo. Dr. Leddy is also the recipient of numerous awards and scholarships: the Governor General's Bronze Medal, the Ontario Citizenship Award, the Canada Council of Christian and Jews Human Relations Award, the Best Publication Award from the College Theology Society, the Award for Distinguished Contribution given by the Roman Catholic Communicators of Canada, as well as several press awards, to name just a few of her many awards. And then there are the many writings, which include Memories of War and Promises of Peace, State of the Darkness, We Beg to Differ, Reweaving Religious Life, At the Border Called Hope, Where Refugees Are Neighbors, Radical Gratitude, and most recently, Our Friendly Local Terrorist. But you should know, we found out at dinner, there's another one that's going to the press at the end of next week, so we're looking forward to that one. In 2002, Dr. Leddy was a distinguished visitor in women's studies at the University of Windsor. And when Windsor was trying to introduce her to the university, they quote Mary Jo herself, who has said, "I've been conceived in England on or about VE Day, and now I realize that I began in a moment of passionate longing for peace, in a moment of promise." And I want to use the words from the University of Windsor to give you a little bit more sense of Mary Jo's personality and conviction. Windsor says, "This child of ethical parents who endowed her with a strong sense of being true to her word, Leddy is a living testament to the difficulties, challenges, and rewards that come with unreservedly embracing an active and engaged Christian life. She has consistently demanded individual and institutional integrity and accountability. And as a result, she has often found herself dogged by controversy. But through it all, she has been sustained by an unflagging faith in human goodness, the power of community, and divine providence." So please join me in welcoming Dr. Mary Jo Leddy to talk with us about the real face of justice.
Thank you very much, Christina, for the kind introduction. Well, I was driving down the 401 from Toronto, and I thought, oh my God, it's Friday night. It's cold. Are we out of our minds? And I was mindful of a true story that I heard many years ago. One thinks of it on occasions like this. And it's the story of a young man who was studying to be a rabbi in New York City. And he was assigned for his pastoral training to a small mental hospital, and there was a little synagogue in the middle of the hospital. And his first task was to preach on the high holy days. So Friday night of the high holy days, everybody came into the little synagogue, and he had determined that he was going to summarize 4,000 years of Jewish history and end with the question, and now, brothers and sisters, why are we here? The question that the youngest child asks at the Passover meal. So everybody came into the synagogue, and he began his sermon, and it rolled through when we came out of Egypt, and then, and we went to Spain, and we went here, and we went there, and now, brothers and sisters, I ask you, why are we here? And from the back of the little synagogue, a man stood up and said, well, Rabbi, maybe because we're not all there. I'd like to situate what I'm going to read by way of beginning. For the last 20 years, as some of you know, I've been living at Romero House, not just working with refugees, but living with them. in a small project that involves 4 houses and a little storefront in the west end of Toronto. So I've had the privilege of living with refugees as neighbors within a small, very ordinary middle-class neighborhood in the west end of Toronto. And that has been life-changing for me and has changed the way in which I approach the work for justice. And it has changed my understanding of God. So I want to begin by reading the first 2 pages of my next book, which is called The Other Face of God When the Stranger Calls Us Home. If you ask me, as if your life depended on it, do you believe in God? I would think twice and answer, yes, I do believe, because I have seen a young woman's face, and her name is Teresita Cedillos. If you turned to me and asked me whether it was possible to be faithful, I would see that you have seen too much to be sure of that anymore. I would look at you and say that fidelity is real, because I have known a woman who struggled for 20 years to bring her husband home. Her name is Hadat Mosa. If you held my hand and whispered, wondering if we could change, I would place my other hand over yours and say, yes, because I was changed when I met a black woman with a white leg and a man who slept with his briefcase. Her name was Deka, and his name was Guggen. If you sat beside me and asked me and mused whether life could be meaningful, I would look ahead and say, for sure as I know the name of Osman Omar and Clara Alvarez, who hung on for dear life. If you looked me in the eyes and challenged both of us about our impossible dreams for peace and justice, I would say, yes, dream on, for there is a little street called Wanda Road where strangers sometimes become neighbors. If you pursued this challenge and asked whether I had seen evil in the world, I would answer, yes, but that it had no name and no face. If you folded your hands into prayer and intoned a most ancient question, do you believe in Jesus Christ? I would cross my heart and say, yes, because a Muslim sheikh helped me help a dying man in the middle of the night. His name was Sheikh Mohammed. If you wrung your hands and asked, and what about the church? Can we be faithful as scandal piles upon scandal? We must, I would reply. That is what I learned from a man by the name of Augustin, who survived the Rwandan genocide. If you breathe deeply and ask the question that had been on your mind from the beginning, have you seen the face of God? I would answer, yes, almost, always. What I am trying to say is that our profound theological concepts and notions, all the various issues of justice and peace that we care about, don't really come into focus until they take on a particular name and a particular face. I have spent, for example, many, many years of my life writing about justice, advocating for people who were poor, working on issues of poverty and peace. I have been part of theological debates about the meaning of the option for the poor. But it didn't come into focus for me until I had the opportunity to live for 2 years with a woman called Teresita Cedillos. She originally had come from Guatemala. She was the daughter of a prostitute and an alcoholic. And at a very early age, she was sent to live with an aunt who hated her because she had beautiful hair. And the aunt would lock her in the cupboard for days on end. The aunt would never talk to her. Teresita hardly went to school, and she married a young man who was very quickly killed by the Guatemalan military. And as she was pregnant, she made her way through Mexico by bus and to the United States, to California, where she had a baby called Jose. And she remembered having this baby and saying to the baby, "What am I going to do with you? I don't know what to do with the baby. I'm all alone." And she prayed that God would help her. As she was trying to look after this child, she also worked in the fields illegally and in various manufacturing industries. And 3 times she was deported back to Guatemala. And she said, "I don't know why, but the Americans don't seem to think there's any problem in Guatemala." This was during the 1980s. So she made her way to Canada and then found her way to Romero House. And she and I shared the same floor, and Jose was there. And so I got to know her, and she got to know me. Very quickly, she got a job under the table, and her job was working at the Royal Alex Theatre, where I had been to many plays. And she said, "My job is to clean in the theater." And I said, "But I didn't think they had popcorn there." And she said, "No, it's not the popcorn, it's people put gum under their seat. So my job is to take the gum out." But she was happy with this job because she said, "I can go to work at 11, I'm back at 7, I can get Jose up and make his breakfast and take him to school. It's a great job." And when she did have a bit of time, she would spend all of her time cleaning the second floor where we lived. And I said, "Teresita, please don't clean. Like, I'm uncomfortable with it. Please don't do this. I can clean too." And she said, "Yes, Miss Mary Jo." And I said, "Don't call me Miss Mary Jo." "Yes, Miss Mary Jo." So this went on, and so she continued to clean, and she would notice everything in the living room, and she said, "I like your pictures." I said, "Which ones?" "Well, the ones that they don't look like a photograph." I said, "Oh, the abstract ones, yes, they make you think. And besides, I like your old-fashioned music." which was classical music, I guess. What I did learn also, though, was that she didn't know how to make rice, which I said I thought every Latin American knew how to make rice. And she said, but I never had a mother. Nobody ever told me. I always burn it. And so I gave her some tips that I had learned from the Africans. I soon discovered that she was getting very tired. And so I offered to take Jose to school in the morning, and we had many enlightening conversations. The first one being, he would say, I'm a big boy now, you know. I said, yeah, that's true. He said, yeah, look at the hair on my legs, it's growing. And then he said, do you know what I wish most in the world? I said, no, what? He said, I wish there was kindness in the world. And then he asked, can people like us go anywhere in the world? And I kind of sidestepped that question and said, well, where would you like to go? And he said, I would like to go to the land where Jesus was born. Another time when I was trying to get some money raised so Teresita could hire a lawyer who wasn't corrupt, she said, well, I have $50 a month that's already set aside for my other child. I said, what other child? And she said, you know, my World Vision child. I said, your World Vision child, yes, you pay $50 a month, and it helps this child to live and to go to school and to eat. And I said, Teresita, you hardly have any money. And she said, the Lord Jesus said we always had to look after people who weren't as happy as we were. So I felt that she was indeed the widow who gave everything. She had many difficulties with immigration because she had a crooked lawyer who didn't do the work, and her life was rather precarious at times. And I remember her crying at one point, and she just said, I don't have a tomorrow. I don't even have today. Now, the story has a happy ending. She did get a good lawyer. She did get accepted. She married a wonderful young man. She began to work for Ace Bakery. She became the manager of her little shop that sold Ace Bakery. And then they bought a house. And then she went to Home Depot every Saturday, all day, and learned how to do wiring and plumbing and drywalling. And then she put an addition on their house herself and took in students to raise a little money so they could pay their mortgage. But as I lived with her, I realized, and this sounds very simple, poverty is not an issue. Poverty has a name and a face. Poverty means having a baby alone. Poverty means never having had a mother to teach you how to cook rice. Poverty means spending your nights cleaning the gum from under the seats that rich people used as they watched a play. Poverty means liking the art and music that other people own. Poverty means that no one ever asks you to stay. Poverty means you can't go anywhere in the world. Poverty means you can't help your child with his homework. Poverty means being locked up and lonely and talking to yourself in a mirror. Poverty means never having a tomorrow. For the very rich, the future is what you make happen. For middle-class people like myself, the future is what you plan for. But for the very poor, the future is just what happens to you. Living with Teresita, and then many others, meant that poverty could no longer be an issue for me. You can walk away from an issue. You can change your interests, but you can't walk away from the person you know, that you've seen their face and you know their name. Another example, and this is so relevant now. About 4 years ago, we welcomed a man from Egypt called Ali, who had been picked up by the police, and they used a blowtorch on his hands and his face. And so he went through all kinds of plastic surgery, and I remember him walking around the house with his fingers all kept separate for months. And as I looked at his face, his half face, I could say, injustice has a face. There is a pharaoh in Egypt, and his name is Mubarak. Another happier example. There is a little boy from Burundi called Mali, who is very poor. It's a son of a single mother. But he has this imagination. So one day, one of the neighbors took him out, and they came back with a goldfish in a little bowl. And I said, Molly, this is a beautiful goldfish. What's its name? And he said thoughtfully, well, first I called it George, but then I called it Gloriana Clementine. And he is not just poor. He has a soaring imagination. He has dreams. He has resources. So to see the face of these people, of Mali, of Ali, of Teresita, of those who are called poor, of those who are called the marginalized, is to be moved to compassion and to mercy and to kindness. And it is in that movement that the desire for justice is born. And I know that I have been part of conversations in which the works of justice were contrasted to the works of mercy. The works of mercy were feeding the hungry, clothing people, finding them housing, and the works of justice were about dealing with the systems of economics and politics that made people poor and kept them poor. And there was this story often repeated to illustrate this point of a little town in which people living by a river could see bodies coming down the river. And for a long time, they kept taking the bodies out of the river and, in a work of mercy, burying them. And then one day, someone asked, and why are the bodies coming down the river? Which was the beginning of social analysis and then the work for justice. But I now think that this isn't how it works. And I'm saying this not just on the basis of my experience, but on the basis of talking with many people like yourselves, people deeply committed to justice, that for most of them, their concern for justice begins with a relationship with a real person, a real family, especially in work for refugees. You can see whole parishes galvanized around welcoming the newcomers. Very middle class, not very radical groups of people are moved by compassion and mercy, and out of that comes the desire for justice. Out of the people, because of the people that I know, you begin to say, why didn't the US think there were problems in Guatemala? Why are there so many corrupt lawyers in the area of immigration? Why aren't they reported on? Why don't the other lawyers do something? You ask these things. And why are we so careless about the injustice done to Muslims? But when you are faced with Ali, with Mali, with Teresita, you know you can't walk away from this struggle for justice, and that you must be faithful. I am saying also what John Esposito, the Salvadoran theologian, has said. He said there is a principle of mercy that animates all of our work for justice. It's what connects us with people. It's what sustains us in connection with them through all our work. Something similar has also been said by Gustavo Gutierrez, that if you are working for the poor, this category of concern, you must at least have one or two friends who are poor. That through them, you understand that this category, this reality of poverty, weighs so heavily, and yet they are more than just a category of concern. They have goldfish called Gloriana clementine. To see another person like Teresita or Molly is also to see your own face. Not the face that you imagine, not the face that others see in you, but who you really are. When you are faced by another person, full of need, full of hope, you are addressed, you are commanded, you are summoned. And it is in the process of answering that summons that you become who you really are. And what I am doing here is really paraphrasing some of the thinking of the French philosopher Emmanuel Levinas, who wrote very complicated philosophical works out of the primary experience of being a refugee. He wrote out of that experience because he had lived through a time in Europe when so many good people did nothing. As he saw it, the problem wasn't so much those who were evil. It was good people who did nothing, good people who, in the face of this immense suffering that was all around them, kept on living a normal life. And he asked himself, how are we to think about this? How can we understand what it means when someone knocks at the door? Do we simply not answer, which is what happened throughout Europe during the Nazi period? Or do we open the door and say, that person doesn't look like me, they are strange, and so I shut the door? And I might be a good person. I go to church, I look after my family. So Emmanuel Levinas was trying to think through this dilemma. And he said most of our Western ethics, our Western thinking, is based on the presumption that if we are good, we will do good. That it depends on me whether or not I do good. So the person is kind of at the mercy of whether or not I'm a good person. But he said the actual truth is different. That it is in doing good that I become good. That I become who I really am. That when someone knocks on the door and says, "You must help me," in that moment you are summoned. And you can say yes and you can say no. But in that moment it's you. You who must respond. And that's when you discover who you really are in that relationship. And it is not because somebody is just like us. For Levinas, he said, it is the stranger, the one who is really different from us, who summons us not to become like them, but to become who we really are. So I think, as an example, I've heard the story of a British journalist who was extremely cynical. He had written about every genocide in Africa. And then one day he was in a field hospital and he was walking down the row and patients were lying on the ground, and he's walking like this on his way to another plane and another tragedy, and a little boy who's lying on the ground reaches up and grabs his hand and won't let go. And the journalist tries to move on with his life, to pass by. And the little boy won't let go. And in that moment, he was summoned, and that journalist would not let that little boy go. And he nursed him back to health, adopted him, and he became his son. In that moment, that journalist knew, I am not just a cynical, jaded person. I can be a good person. I will be responsible. And it is in those moments of being summoned that you know, not that you are strong, but you must be. And you must be responsible. And you know you feel weak and exhausted. Now, I've used rather dramatic examples from the world of refugees. But it's not that much different from the experience that parents have when you have a child. there is this child who might look like you, but maybe not. And very soon, most parents realize this is a different person. And this person is summoning me in the middle of every night, crying for help. And you are summoned. Most of you know what that's like, those long, sleepless nights. And in responding to this child, this newcomer, who you don't really know yet, never will, you become generous, responsible, and you know how often you feel exhausted and impatient as well. It's what happens when a newcomer, the strange one, bursts upon the scene. So it is, as Levinas would say, that we become ethical in relationship with others. And most often, really ethical in terms of those who are not like us. And when we really probe that, we could say that that awareness of how different another person is marks every relationship. I remember talking with a very well-known theologian, Protestant theologian, who had been married for almost 50 years. And he said to me, you know, when my wife comes down for breakfast in the morning, sometimes I think, I hardly know her. And it's a happy marriage. He's saying the more I get to know her, I get a sense of her mystery, that there's something I will never know. But my point is simply that it is the other person. It is by being with another, someone like Teresita, like your child, like your husband or wife, who summons us and faces us. It's when we are faced, we are summoned to become who we truly are. I see this all the time with our young interns at Romero House. We have a internship program where younger people who would be 23, 24, usually spend a year living in our houses with the refugees, seeking to become good neighbors. And it creates a universe that the houses themselves are a place of moral consequence, where students who were barely convinced of the value of much that they did, all of a sudden realize that everything they do has consequence. And I'm thinking of somebody called Matt, wonderful person from the Maritimes, who was living in a house, it's my house actually, with a woman from Rwanda who was expecting a baby any day. And Matt had never worked at anything more than flipping burgers. And he was not at all convinced that any of his university studies mattered to anybody. And so he was kind of shuffling through life. And this woman, her name was Varen, was expecting, and I had to go out of town. And I said, well, Matt, if she goes into labor, take her to the hospital. And he was like terrified. And he said, but I can't do that. I said, sure you can. You can drive. Here's the map. Let's go, man. And he's like, and that's exactly what happened. He drove her, he stayed with her, and he was faithful to her. And he really helped her and that little boy. That he became decent, responsible, and just because she needed him to be that. However, we all work in systems, immigration systems, government systems, business systems, educational systems, medical systems that deface us, that deface the truth of, for example, refugees, that turn them into files and numbers, that deface us, that deface everybody working in these systems. We work in agencies that define people by their problems, unemployment agencies, welfare agencies. People who work in those agencies treat people as social problems that need to be fixed, instead of treating them as immense gifts to this society. When we see this defacement, when we see the kinds of injustice that result when people lose their faces, their dignity, when they are treated without value, we can all too easily begin to demonize somebody. The problem with the United States is George Bush. He's the problem. The problem in Canada is Stephen Harper. He's the problem. And so we set up these sort of creatures, enemies. And we can also be tempted to present ourselves and others as the innocent victims. They are the enemy, we are the helpless ones. And so the struggle for all of us is to remain life-size. To say Stephen Harper and George Bush are human beings. They're not demons. They have strengths and weaknesses. And refugees and justice workers, we too, we have strengths and weaknesses. And so we need to claim that. Claim the importance of reminding ourselves that these systems that deface people include people. And our task, I believe, as Christians, is to summon all of us to find our faces again, to see each other as human beings. I have a very dramatic memory of being in an interview for permanent residence with a woman who had a lot of points on the immigration scale. She had a hairdresser job, which was high. She spoke English, and the officer was checking off all of these pluses. And she had 2 boys. At the close of the interview, the officer said to her, "Okay, sweetie, what do you think you've got to contribute to this country?" And she thought about it, and she said, "My children. I give my children." And he put a big X. That was a liability. Children are an expense. And so as we went out of the interview, we went down the hallway, and I could see him coming out of the back of his office, and so I cornered him. He was sorry. And I said, "She was right. She got it right. If somebody asked you, what's the best thing you have to give, wouldn't you say your kids? Wouldn't you say that?" He shuffled, but he was faced. And we have to do that with the systems that we have that so deface ourselves and other people. But it's hard, because in many, many systems, when you try to find out who's responsible, it's like nobody. You go to the politicians and say, please do something about this economy. No, we can't. We're helpless. We're powerless. The World Bank, etc. You go to the Prime Minister. Oh no, I can't do anything. The market, the free trade, the this. Poor Prime Minister and cabinet ministers are helpless. The bankers are helpless. And then you talk to people on the bottom level of government or industry, and they say, we just do what we're told. We're following the regulations. And so you poke around systems, and it's like nobody's responsible. And I think this is what's called systematic evil. And Hannah Arendt, a long time ago, remarked that the medieval image of the devil was the one who had no face, who wore a mask. And that is when systems deface people to the extent that nobody seems responsible. That's when evil flourishes. And what we need to do is to reclaim our own face and to face other people within those systems and say, you're not totally responsible, but you have some responsibility, and so do we. And we face each other. For this to work, for us to reclaim our faces within unjust systems that tend to deface human beings, we have to be close enough in proximity to other people that we really see their face, that they see ours, and that we see our own selves. The great paradigm of the Christian life is the story of the Good Samaritan. And if you read it carefully, as Jesus is responding to, what must I do? He says, love God, love your neighbor. The man said, who is my neighbor? And Jesus tells the story of the priest and the Levite who pass by the man by the side of the road. And then comes the Samaritan, the stranger. And we are told, and this is the key, he drew near to the person by the side of the road. He saw him. And he took him to the inn and stayed with him. And what we have in this relationship, the paradigm of being a good neighbor, is the care and concern for someone who doesn't belong to my family, who isn't just like me, who's different from me, but I still care. And so we find in the Gospels an alternative between the extremes that have marked our political thinking in the 20th century. The extreme of a world divided between the personal and the political, between those whom we are familiar with and those whom we don't know, between friends and enemies. And as a third alternative, Jesus says there is the imperative of becoming a neighbor. Not close enough to be family, but not so distant. To be a neighbor means to be in proximity. And in some recent writings on political theory, particularly the works of somebody called Slavoj Žižek, this concept of the neighbor, the one who is not too close but not too far, is re-emerging as fundamental importance because it is in neighborhoods, in consciously deciding who we want to be near, that we begin to reclaim the possibility of seeing each other face to face. And you find this in the writings of Wendell Berry, who talks about rural communities in which people know each other, are familiar with each other, and are in the proximity to the land. And you find this in the urban writings of a woman like Jane Jacobs, who in her magnificent description of the street talks about a street on which neighbors aren't in each other's houses all the time, but they look out for each other. They see when trouble is coming. They see when the kids have a bicycle accident or when there's problem with the snow. So I think it's important to recall that Jesus spoke about enemies and he spoke about becoming friends, but he had a lot to say about becoming a neighbor, about being close enough to people that we can see their faces and they can see ours. And in conclusion, and I could go on, but I see the time, I think that this is essential for us as a church today. We talk about a lot of issues. Issues in society, issues within the church. But I think we need to be grounded in this fundamental summons to become a good neighbor, to see people very different from ourselves and allow them to summon us to become who we truly are. And I believe that a church that will see people like Muslims, people like Teresita, like Molly and Ali, will rediscover its own true face. We are called, as John Esposito said, to be a Samaritan church. But it is also true that the church today is the one wounded by the side of the road. And just as others can summon us to goodness, we can ask others to be good to us, to care for us. And there's a powerful painting by a Scandinavian artist called Hugo Simberg. It's called The Wounded Angel. And it's a picture of an angel sitting on a stretcher, blindfolded. And the angel is wounded. And the angel is being carried on a stretcher outside the city by two boys who are obviously very poor. And one possible interpretation of this is that the church is the wounded angel. And she is being carried by these poor boys outside the city to be with them, to be strong again. The church is both the Samaritan, summoned by the needs of others, but also the one who lies wounded by the side of the road. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Jo. Mary Jo has agreed to take a few questions. We have microphones at both sides of the room, so if you would make your way to the microphones, speak clearly, speak succinctly, and please, questions.
As you were speaking, I was thinking of Bill C-474, which was just defeated in Parliament. It was to more carefully examine approval of genetically modified seeds, step by step. It was voted down. I wrote our parliamentarian here, pointing out that what he was voting against was farmers. They have lost their external markets because flax and canola that are raised in Canada now cannot be sold in Europe and other places. I pointed out that over 100,000 Indian farmers took on GMO seeds. They failed. The Monsanto promised that they were pest-free. Boll weevils ate them. They said they would give huge yields. Monsanto didn't tell them that it would take twice as much water. So over 100,000 of them committed suicide. Those were all people that were affected by those negative votes. Michael Ignatieff stayed away. Bob Ray voted against the bill. These are things I can't understand.
Well, yes, I agree with you, and the only thing I could add is that if it was possible to present even one or two examples of people's lives who had been so destroyed by this, it can bring the question into focus. But I know Percy Schmeiser, so I know what's happening there. Questions, comments? Yeah.
They're just shy.
Hmm?
They're just shy.
Oh, I don't believe it. This is St. Jerome's.
I don't know. Is this working? Or
Yeah.
am I too short? Probably. When you're talking about being a neighbor to these different people from different cultures, I find that, and you probably reiterated this yourself, that it is really easy for many of us to take a major slam against the Muslim population and blacks, well, even the blacks now are not quite so bad, but we're right on the Muslims morning, noon, and night about literally everything, to the point where I don't sit and eat with any because I don't know any people per se. But how do you fight that within yourself on a consistent basis? I think you answered the whole thing tonight by just your talk, your speech, but it's fear of our survival being kind of wrecked because of potential terrorists, whatever. Thank you.
I don't think there's any quick answer to your question, but I think that at the core of it is we have to consciously place ourselves in proximity to, for example, some Muslims, to just meet them. I think that's the key. It sounds very, very simple. But to see them face to face, to talk with them, you don't have to be friends, you don't have to like them, you don't have to, but to say, we could share this neighborhood, we could share this school, because we see each other, we look out for each other. We're not friends, but we're not enemies. But we're never going to do that if we just stick within the world that we know and with the people that we know. It's very striking to me that there's a whole group of people, they're called bankers, I guess, who drive from Rosedale and Forest Hill in Toronto to Bay Street in limos. They never see anybody on the subways, ever. So we're kind of like that. We're drive-by people. We just drive by. And I'll just give you an example of how I realized that I myself had been changing after living with so many Africans. I remember walking down Ronsonsville's one night in the summer alone, and there was a group of black kids on the corner. And I had this immediate kind of, and then they said, "Hey, Mary Jo, how are you doing?" They were kids that had lived with us. I knew them. So, you know, I know the hesitancy, but I also know what the answer is.
Yes.
I have two quick questions. First of all, if we're in our jobs or in our lives and we see some of the sort of systematic evil that's going on that we're to be part of, it's very easy to say, well, we should just not do that evil, but that's also a great way to lose our jobs sometimes. And just sort of how to sort of deal with that. And the second one is kind of unrelated and maybe snarky, but why, you were talking about how having relationships face-to-face and knowing relationships personally is very important to actually understanding the abstractions, and that makes me wonder why priests can't marry.
You really want to touch that one, don't you?
So the first question was, if you're in a system that's unjust and if you criticize, you will lose your job. What I think is that as long as you just are on your own and thinking that it's up to you in this system, you probably will either capitulate and become totally demoralized and seek early retirement, or you will be fired. But in those situations, if we can gather together with like-spirited people where we can create a sense of building an alternative or causing some change, then there's a possibility of systems changing. And I think we saw this in Egypt. You know, the networking of people, they weren't alone. So I think that as long as we live in splendid isolation, very little can ever happen. We just exist within systems and do our job, and that's it. The thing of priests and marrying, I think it's too simple to say they'd understand if they were married, because you can get married people who don't understand at all. But what is true is that we all, in whatever form, need to live in relationships in which we are constantly being summoned beyond ourselves. And that may be in marriage, it may be in having children, it may be, as I met this Jesuit priest who lived with the untouchables of India for 19 years and was a happy person. So that to me is the core of it, is this, the ability, whatever it is, to be called beyond yourself. And you see that. When people see that in each other, no matter how different they are, they understand. So, I'm not trying to dance around your question. That's really what I think.
I've got a question.
Yeah, Scott.
So I'll take the mic here and ask a question. I know that there's a few Lutherans in the house, and Lutherans.
Oh, I see. Jesse.
These are our friends.
I thought he said losers.
Losers. No. I won't ask the Lutherans whether they think they're losers or not, but I suspect not. I mean, one of the people that you talked about in some detail tonight was Emmanuel Levinas. And if you've been staring at the backdrop tonight, you'll know that the theme of this year's lecture series is actually responsible citizenship, and it comes from a center that we've created at St. Jerome's entitled the Center for Responsible Citizenship. And somebody asked me at some point where we got this name, and it's not public. Levinas was one of them, and the other one is Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and whom I've studied in some detail. And part of what you were saying tonight sort of posed a question in my mind that Bonhoeffer had, is that what happens when you do get the madman who's behind the wheel? You know, and you start taking actions that seem to go against your church, against your culture, and so on. And you've kind of laid a little bit of that out tonight. So how do you deal with that person who is mad, right? Whether it's Hosni Mubarak, I mean, whoever, and not deface them. I mean, this is a real tension, I think, in trying to deal with responsibility in that way. Do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, it's a very tricky question. Sorry.
Well, I don't know Bonhoeffer like super well, but what has struck me is that he shifted the basis for ethical thinking. That instead, when he was considering being part of the plot to murder Hitler, the madman, he said, I know that as a moral person, I will be judged on this. But that my moral purity cannot be the main point of reference. My point of reference is how will this affect future generations? And I think that that's what the Native peoples say. So that's just one thought, that's extremely important. But I think the thing of calling somebody a madman is to almost make them demonic. And then it makes them not quite human, not like us. And that's dangerous because Hitler was, this is even more frightening, he was a human being. He was probably a really ordinary human being. That's the scary thing. He wasn't another species. He wasn't. That's what's really frightening. And so I still think that we have to remain life-size, that these terrible people are still human, and so are we, and that's what we have to deal with ethically.
That's fine.
Maybe one more question over here. Yep. Oh, two. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. I'm interested in knowing how we apply what you're saying tonight to, I presume, I don't want to speak for everybody in this room, but I live in a middle-class neighborhood, and I notice, and when you look at real estate, that when people sell you real estate, they basically are taking you away from the poorer areas of the city, the less desirable areas of the city. Mm-hmm. So I'm just wondering, you're speaking to a culture here, in KW and Canada, for that people are living precisely to get away from the poverty, mm-hmm. to get away from where our kids won't hang around with mm-hmm. poorer kids and kids that might get it, whatever, So how, I know you went and lived with these people. What do you suggest? How do you